Hello everybody, it's Alex, and sorry it's been a couple of days since I've done a vlog. I don't even really have a good excuse because uh, work's been kind of slow, and mostly I've just been working on like this freelance editing project that's just kind of mentally ate my brain. Mentally ate my brain? No, it just kind of ate my brain, which made me just not do anything else except like sit on the couch with the cat in my lap, or as I've taken to fondly calling him, the furry poop log. If you've seen that. Um, and let's see, just to catch up on things, our team did not do great at Geeks Who Drink on Tuesday. We got like fifth. It was just, we should have like jokered the music round, and we were missing one of our team members, and then we did shit on round 8, which is normally where we do better, and it was just not good. It was a bad situation. But hopefully next week will be fine, and it's good for other people to win sometimes. We still had pizza and drank beer, and that's the important part. I'm sad to report that the sad, empty ball sacks of sci-fi are still, like, fluttering limply in the breezes of obscurity, fighting for relevance so desperately. And, you know, the only reason I have even noticed their tired waggling in the breeze is mostly because they're, like, messing with Foz and being dicks to Jim Hines and harassing people in their mentions, and it's pathetic. So that's all I'm gonna say about that. Instead today I'm gonna answer a question because somebody commented, "Hi, thank you for watching my vlog and commenting and stuff. It's super cool." Joe Max Christensen, hopefully I pronounced your last name correctly. I'm just bad at talking. You know, that's why I'm a writer and not like a professional talker. But they said I'd mentioned a while back about outlining, so hey, what about my outlining process? And so basically, I have always been an outliner. Like in the great pantser versus outliner debate, I am firmly on outliner. I'm firmly a plotter. I have pantsed a couple of things, and it just ended up being a lot of writing in circles, and then when I went back and edited, I was cutting like a third of what I'd written because it was just sort of like wandering, like trying to figure out what my point was. I plot short stories less, which is actually probably why I find them so much harder to write, because I have to kind of painfully think them out as I'm writing them, and I hate it. And the best short stories I've written have pretty much been ones where I've kind of had at least a rough idea of the plot in advance. And so I've always outlined, and I tend to do just like a numbered point by point, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And it's a process that I've just basically been refining ever since I started it, where, you know, initially I would be like, okay, I know this is where I'm starting, and I know this is where I'm going to end up, and now I'm going to try to think broadly about the things that are going to happen in between, because if you've heard me whine about the second act, you will know that that is my kryptonite. So that's why I need to think these things through before I get lost in the weeds. And so, like, when I was doing Hunger Makes the Wolf, I had a several-page handwritten outline that kind of ballooned as I was getting into it, and kind of seeing that more and more things had to happen until I realized that I could not fit all of that into one book. I actually initially thought it was going to be 3 books, but I got where I needed them to go in Blood Binds the Pack, so go me. But that was kind of like a sort of weak version of how I outline now, because I hit that problem where I was like, oh, I know point A and point B and all the stuff in between, and it's fine. And then it just sort of exploded as I was writing it, and I had to keep redrafting the outline to be like, oh, now, you know, all this more detailed stuff is happening, and I know where these other things are going in. And that just meant that I had no idea how long the thing was actually going to be. So, at this point, the process that I've hit now, which I'm not going to say is perfect, but has worked for me for outlining Blood Binds the Pack, and then the novel that I just finished doing the rough draft on, and the next novel that I'm going to write, is I start out, because I always know where I'm starting and where I'm going to end. So I always start out writing basically a 3-paragraph summary of the work, which is very useful to be able to do, by the way. I mean, as you continue in your career as a writer, the ability to summarize is hard won, and it sucks, and it's incredibly important because you need it when you're pitching to agents or editors. You need to be able to write a blurb for the, like the summary that you're going to put on the back cover of your book. So you need to start honing in on that now, how to do it. And what really helped me figure out how to do summaries like that was actually when I took a screenwriting course, because with the screenwriting process, you start out and they're like, okay, we just want a log line. We want a 1-sentence summary, maybe 2 sentences if you're going really long, about what your thing is about. And then you can expand it out to 1 page. And then we'll let you have 3 pages, 1 for each act. And after that, you can go into your outline. And that's the process that has really started working for me, because the thing that having to write a short summary does is it really makes you focus on what is the main giant plot arc, who are the most important characters, and what do they actually do in relation to that? What are the most important points that will reach out and grab people about this story? And then the rest is just detail. And I know when I started out, when it was like I needed to write summaries, and this was when I was kind of doing it backwards, where I'd write the thing and then I'd have to write the summary. It's just a fucking nightmare, because you think that everything you wrote is super important and you can't leave out all the little plot twists and details, and trust me, you can. There needs to be a distillation of what is the most important part of the plot of this book, and what is the major plot arc, and what development does your main character undergo? Who are they, and what are they doing? And, also keep in mind that, like, this is not a magic bullet for everyone. I write, I don't write award-winning stuff. I don't write really literary stuff. I write, people riding motorcycles around in the desert and shooting at each other stuff. So this is not necessarily going to work for everybody. But, so I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, I have an idea for a book. I know that this is where I'm starting. These are my main characters. And this is where they're going to end up. And I write like a 3-paragraph or at most 1-page summary detailing, the start, the end, and what I know has to happen in the middle, which is normally very bare in detail. And at this point, since I have a really cool agent who I can bounce ideas off of, I'll write this short summary, or maybe go into a 2 or 3 page and then throw it at him and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And he can take the broad look and just be like, that sounds cool, or I think you need to refocus here, or, that doesn't sound like a novella, I think it sounds like a novel, or whatever. And that's really good feedback to get to begin with. So you don't have to have an agent in order to do that part of the step. You just need somebody that you can be like, hey man, I know you like the kind of stuff I write. What if I did a story like this? Do you think that would be cool? Would you be interested in reading this? Does this sound interesting? So it's never too early to get feedback on kind of that high level almost. So, like, after I've written that really super short summary, sometimes I'll go through and I'll write, like, the 3-page where I'm like, okay, I figured out more of the shit that has to happen in the middle, because middles are my kryptonite. But I know that this is, like, the broad shape of how we're going to get my people from point A through to Z, or wherever they're going to end up. I know that these are the things that have to happen in order for the ending to be kind of logical in the world that I've built. So once I've written up my 1 or 2 summaries, that's the point where I actually start outlining. And my outlining process is normally like, I'll start out and I'll be able to do a really super detailed Act 1 plotline, because that's the part in my head where I'm like, I already know all these things that are going to happen. And I normally know like how the big explodey ending is going to happen, so I can outline that. And then I start doing kind of like the bare sketch in between of, okay, I need to hit this point, this point, this point, this point, and this point. And that's my first pass. And then I go through and I do another pass where I'm like, okay, now that I know this and this and this, okay, but what is this character doing? And how do these things relate? And I start expanding each of the plot points into more detail. And then I'll be like, oh, I've got this cool idea for some dialogue that needs to happen right at this point. And I'll actually put that in the outline because you cannot be too detailed in these outlines as far as I'm concerned. And I don't want to lose a cool idea for character interaction. So I just keep going over it and going over it and going over it and adding more detail and making sure that, you know, all the places that these people are going are adding up to where I want them to end up. And the other thing you need to keep in mind when you're doing this process is sometimes you'll start figuring out how shit happens in your second act or, you know, your second, third, and fourth if you're doing a 5-act structure or whatever. And you'll realize that where you thought you were going to end up with them is not actually the correct ending point, or where you started with them is not the correct starting point. And that's totally fine. That's why you're doing an outline instead of figuring this out while you're actually writing the book, which is a thing that I hate. So basically, you just keep going through and going through and going through until you're like, all of this knits together properly and it feels like a pretty well structured plot and everybody's going in all the directions that they need to and I'm getting them from point A to point Z and everything they're doing in between makes sense and seems to be building appropriately to where I want them to go. And then if you're lucky and you have someone who will actually read outlines and doesn't hate them, you give your outline to them and let them poke holes in it. Because the whole point with outlining to this degree, and we're talking like I did, what did I say? It was like a 13,000 word outline for Blood Binds the Pack. I mean, it was ludicrous. It might have been even longer than that. I don't know. I'd have to go look at it again. But it's because you're really figuring out chapter by chapter. Like, I mean, I had everything color coded so I knew whose POV I had per chapter. And, you know, I would have like between 4 and 7 plot points per chapter is kind of like the level of detail I was at. And occasionally like little sub points if I was like, and then they have this conversation where I want to use this good line that I thought of and I don't want to lose. But you're doing all of this now because that way you can show it to someone or you can put it in a drawer and look at it next month and see where your plot structure problems are before you start writing. So that you can be like, oh wow, man, like, God, looking at it, like, proportionally, my first act is, like, super fucking long compared to the other ones, and that's just not gonna work, because we need to, like, get through, you know, the normal, disturbing the normal, and just figuring out the problem, and then launch into the second way faster than I'm doing that now, so how do I do that? And you figure out where all of your problem areas are before you ever type word 1. And what that means is that you're doing restructuring when it's just like moving sentences around in an outline instead of like, you know, what am I going to do with this entire chapter? I just have to cut it and get rid of it. And it's not perfect. Like, I still had to cut, I think I cut like 5 chapters out of Blood Binds the Pack when I was done with it. But it meant that I had most of the major plot structure issues figured out before I ever started writing it, which is incredibly useful. And then the other thing is just, you end up with this really incredibly detailed outline that you've expanded out and you've done multiple drafts of, and it's still a living document because as you are writing, you know, your characters will still interact in much more detail than what you put in the outline. So they might go off and, you know, a conversation might go differently than you thought it would, and they're going to go off in a different direction, or you're going to have an idea where you're like, oh my God, it would be so much cooler if, and then you're like, okay, let's pause, gonna go back to the outline, rework it so that now the new cool thing is in there, and, you know, I've played out all the ripple effects, which sometimes means you're like, oh, there's some stuff, you know, that I've already written that I'm going to have to change, which is now easy because I know exactly where it is and what I'm going to have to change, and I can write myself a note or I could go fix it right now. But you can let those changes kind of ripple out and see what happens with them without having to rewrite a shitload of prose, which I think is also really useful. Or you can do like an experimental thing where you're like, well, what if I, you know, have a different viewpoint in this chapter? How is that going to change kind of the order of my chapters or the flow of it? Or, you know, I want to change this one thing. Let's see how that would play out later. You know, this and this and this and this. and I haven't had to actually write it yet. So that's kind of the broad idea of my outlining process. So you start with the short summary where you're like, it is a book about people doing a thing. That's like 3 paragraphs. That's all you get. Then you can expand it out if you kind of have more idea how they're doing the thing that they're doing, or how they're interacting with it, or what's going on. And then you go, here are the broad points of my outline that I put in the summary that I know have to happen, and now I need to start adding detail in between them until it all makes sense. And all you're really missing at that point is like, your scene descriptions and your dialogue. So hopefully that made sense, and hopefully that is helpful to people. And if there's anything I need to clarify or whatever, like, let me know. I wish I could give you examples, but like I'm not going to show you the outlines from the shit that hasn't been published yet. And so therefore I can't like show you the Bloodbinds of the Pack outline because, that's still not out yet, and it's full of spoilers. So anyway, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll talk to you later.